the Earth Day Summit, recently hosted by the Open University of Hong Kong, experts from around the world gathered to discuss ways to address, and possibly solve, some of the most pressing environmental problems that face us. In the following session, two presenters propose practical ways of dealing with the day-to-day realities of living in a post-industrial age. In the first session, Elke Kornalen-Schleper, a management consultant at the Peak Energy, shares her experience with waste-to-energy schemes and assesses their track record in several European countries.
The reason I was asked by you guys to be here is probably that I have 10 years experience in the Netherlands. I went through a few liberalizations through the gas market, the power market, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, all of those. And then 2 years ago I came here. That was quite an interesting experience. Coming from a country where everything is possible, where everybody can produce and connect to the pipelines and into the power grid, you come to a market with a market that has more kind of a closed nature, maybe, just to be a bit careful on that one. But that's why I would like to use this opportunity to show you a few of the success stories that we've seen in the Netherlands. Companies that have been able to monetize the possibilities that exist within the current infrastructure and the imperfections in the market, although it's a liberalized market. I think it's important for us to go back a few years. 80s, 90s, my hometown was actually being characterized by 5 chimneys of a coal-fired power plant, and right next to it was a landfill. It's all gone. It's all gone now, because with the liberalization of the market also came the first stages towards the energy transition. Governments trying to solve the market failures by subsidizing the commodity that doesn't have a price, the emissions. Doing that by the tariffs, but also giving the new energy sources preferential rights. And when we talk about waste to energy, I also think we should look at wasted energy, because there is a lot of that. And if we see what has been upcoming in the last few years, we can recognize 3 big groups. It's the renewable energies, of course, particularly wind for Northwest Europe, solar more for China, and who knows, waves maybe in the end. Then the energy efficiency that has already been touched on quite a bit today. And then at last, the waste. Waste is not waste. It's energy in a little wrap that can be used again, just by applying a certain kind of process. And that's something that nobody realized for a long time. And why not? Simply because it was too expensive to go through that process. It was cheaper to buy a bit of coal, gas, and burn that instead of trying to find the energy. And the only reason for that is, again, this lack of price for emissions. So we used the landfills. Waste had no economic value. Neither the emissions, but also not the scarcity of land was being priced into all of this. So I would like you to show a few of the examples. Some I've been involved in quite a bit, and this is one of them. Whereas others I have, for different kind of reasons, very much respect. So the waste treatment facility in Amsterdam was one of the earlier ones that started to use waste and generate power with it and heat. It was electricity, simply because in the Netherlands, electricity was being subsidized and gas not. So what you do is you make gas and you make steam and you got electricity. So the interesting bit about this is afval energiebedrijf, they chose to be responsible for the production, but to find a partner to actually facilitate the rest of the process. And we were the partner, so that was the link. What we see is that the waste treatment facility, they get 600 trucks a day. 600 trucks from Amsterdam, and they're also importing waste from around the world. It's enough to service 320,000 households, and it's an enormous amount of electricity, but also heat, because this plant is also linked to a heat network. Heating up the water, people can shower in the morning, all of those things. But with these kind of facilities, you run into different issues. As the buyer of the electricity and of the water, you'll never know what you're going to get, because it's not always that reliable. Maybe there is a bit of less waste, or for other reasons there is suddenly no production. In that sense, things like waste to energy, but also with all the renewable sources, they're creating uncertainty in the market, and uncertainty has a price. It's okay at the moment. There's still enough infrastructure, so we can compensate for that. But if all of the existing infrastructure would disappear, it would become interesting, I would say so. This particular company, they also produce a bit of raw materials, but selling it themselves. The Meerlanden green trucks. It's in the western part of the Netherlands, right there where the tulips are being farmed. Also a waste collection company, and they're protein as well. And they have a very large fleet of trucks. They were a bit later in their process than waste treatment facility in Amsterdam, and could benefit from the gas subsidies. They were very ambitious. So instead of producing gas and injecting that into the grid, they decided to use it for their own fleet. They're going for a full neutral carbon as of 2016. So all of their trucks will be running on CNG. What they're doing is, obviously within the process that they're managing completely on their own, they're also producing heat. Luckily, they are in the right district and they can sell it to greenhouse farmers who will heat the greenhouses with it. They will do the same with the CO2. The CO2 acts as a growth stimulant. And the water, also cleaning the streets. They're sweeping the streets in Amsterdam after there's been a big party, and that water comes also from this fermentation process. The two projects are both active in the waste collection business, and they also recognize adding value by adding the energy business to the value chain. There are some big differences. Is who is the customer? Who is actually using the gas? Are they themselves the consumer of the gas, or are they using a different party for that? Also, when it comes to the type of commodity that they're producing, there is a big difference. It has different characteristics, and also commercially, the behavior is different. Gas, in the end, is a bit more flexible than electricity. But both, you would expect that they're doing this because it's commercially a good deal. And it is, for sure, because they're getting the subsidies. But there is more. It's also from a sustainability perspective that they have to do this. If they don't show that they're making a move on the road towards sustainability, they will lose their customers. And their customer, their biggest one, is the government. And beside the subsidies that the government is giving, when they tender their projects, they require that you're doing something else with your wasted energy. So either it's almost use it or lose it, you're losing your business. This I found an interesting one. It's a complex one. There's a municipality in the middle of the Netherlands who obviously did their roadside grass cutting for years on their own. They had those guys working for them who went out on the streets, they cut the grass and threw it away. Nothing was happening with the grass. But also here the government got a bit smarter and started to realize there might be a bit more in the value chain than just cutting the grass. And so what they did, they acknowledged that that grass had a value and you shouldn't be throwing it away, but they wouldn't be able to extract that value. So just via a simple PPP structure, they tendered for a contractor who would both mow the roadside grass under a performance contract, but who would also be forced to convert the grass into biogas, and hence creating value. it also meant, obviously, that the municipality expected a discount. So what it means is there are so many parties involved when it comes to these kind of structures. The municipality just talks to the contractor. But the contractor is not the person who is actually cutting the grass. Neither is he the farmer who is actually doing the gasification process. And he's also not the one transporting the gas. So what you see happening here is behind the one simple contract between the municipality and the contractor are many more. But it also means that the actual value chain is much better optimized than it was ever before. So, okay, I couldn't resist this one. I didn't want to go into too many of the details, but obviously there are a few cows in the Netherlands. About 4 million, so half a cow for every person living there. And it's worse when it comes to what they produce. Just minus 79 billion kilogram of waste. I did a bit of the statistics. I was quite surprised too. But what it means is literally that every farmer with around 100 cows can provide almost a village full with people with electricity and heat. That is quite surprising. I think we have a bit of extra gas here. So what we do see here is that these kind of companies are taking over the role of the traditional supply companies, the traditional utilities. They're losing ground. The fermentators or the waste to energy companies, they're injecting gas. They're supplying gas to other people as well. They're taking a bit of their market share. But what you also see is that the network in itself is becoming much more important. So this whole liberalization process that came with the unbundling of the utilities into a supply company and a network company turned out to be really well at this point in time. Most of those companies that are doing these kind of things, they're rather small. It makes them flexible. They have short decision-making processes. They're open to corporations and don't have to talk to a board 200, 300,000 kilometers away from them. And what you see is that they form very close ties in the package. So the customers are really close. They're tight for a long period as well. And the products, it's no longer one product. It's a mixture of the products. It's a complete package that is happening there. And like I said, it's really taking over the role of the utilities that will never be able to get into waste, especially not at this time, because they don't have the money. So demand is very important in all of this. And that also has to do with the financing of these kind of facilities. There needs to be a certain kind of comfort by the banks that there is enough demand. So the good news is that all those products are still eligible for subsidies, and obviously they also get the normal price for the commodity. But again, it's not just the price and it's not just the numbers today, but it's also a longer term view. It's about being sustainable and maintaining your customer base in the long term. So what were really the enablers that made all of this possible? Well, obviously the financial incentives that were there. The green certificates, that was definitely a good thing for all of these projects. They got preferential feed-in as well. And the government getting into this program of only sustainable sourcing created demand for these kind of products. If the utilities had not been unbundled, the attitude of the network companies would have been very different. Today, they see their growth business in facilitating this kind of business. That's their growth area, so they grab that with both hands. It did mean that there was a quite significant development necessary of the infrastructure network. It's the metering, it's the physical back delivery that needs to be possible, and a lot of data that needs to be crunched. But also, again, the ESG, it does something. The customers are getting a different mindset and they seem to be willing to pay for green at the moment. But that's today. Like we said before, the the production is not always that stable from the smaller facilities. That's okay because it's still a relatively small share. But if that share gets bigger, it means that especially the margins of the big utilities for their big power plants will decline even further, meaning that they will actually demolish them and mothballing. That would reduce the flexibility in the system, and that will create costs because it means that you have to go look at batteries. And one of the things, of course, is we're willing today to pay for green, but will we still do that in a few years? On the financing, I noticed that it's quite difficult to get that done for the smaller projects. You don't get at the table with the right people because your project is too small. I think that the development in the Netherlands was really driven by the investments in the infrastructure networks, the subsidy schemes, but also by the increasing awareness and push towards sustainability from customers. It was all helped by the academic and expert work groups who were trying to advance the technology. But what does it mean for Hong Kong? Can Hong Kong really learn something from that? Well, Hong Kong is a bit in a different situation. It's not entirely the same. You don't have the same starting point. There is no subsidy scheme. The regulatory regime is quite complex, but what you do see are a lot of international companies who are having material activities here with data centers, using a lot of energy. And it might be that at one point they will start to ask for alternative supply options that are more sustainable. So there will be a push from both sides. In my view, it will be a government push towards more sustainable and towards this transition. But also the community and the sustainability path will definitely work towards that. Thank you.
In the second presentation, Suzanne Cheung, CEO of Friends of the Earth Hong Kong, explains the principles of transit-oriented development, a way of planning cities that aims to maximize the utility of public transport and natural, carbon-free means of getting around, such as walking and cycling.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Knowing I'm the last speaker, time is always not on my side. But transit-oriented development also about time and climate change. As you probably read the climate report published by the Hong Kong government, a lot of topics we have covered this morning and this afternoon, talking about green consumptions, talking about importance of trees, energy efficiencies for buildings, and climate finance, and even waste to energy. But one of the very key elements also in there is about transport, and transport takes about 19% of the carbon emissions to be emitted by Hong Kong. And actually, if you look at the mass scale and around the world, it may not be that bad, but Hong Kong is a very small place, and it's very concentrated, and we are railway-relying city. So what is TOD? TOD, if I put it in C40's term, is an urban planning principle that promotes high-density, mixed-use development integrated with a robust public transport system. So what does it mean? If you find a well-planned TOD neighborhood, it means the place you will have multimodal public transport. It's a hub to connect people to go to work, public amenities, retail, cafes, shops, places of worship, civic places, home of residence, schools, childcare center, recreational facilities, you name it. So a well-planned TOD neighborhood consolidate activities in one point. So why is so good? There are three major benefits that can be brought by TOD. And first, it reduces traffic generation through compact development. It reduces the need to travel by private vehicles with associated reduction in impact of traffic congestions and improvement in air quality and road safety. Just give you an example. In New York City, when they implement more walking and cycling friendly planning, they have reduced the traffic and pedestrians injuries by 63% and 35% respectively. So there's quite a tangible benefit for well-planned transit system. So what else is good for TOD? It improves the access to economic opportunities and social equalities. What does it mean? It sounds so magical. Well, if I don't need to travel so far from home to work and to places to meet, I work here, I spend here, I can find my job here, I can live here. People can spend less on housing and transportation. It will create a vibrant, people-focused community with maximum access to public transport and economic activities. And some of the places in Hong Kong you can find it, kind of like a local community that you can do that, but a little bit difficult for work sort of perspective. But in Los Angeles, the high proportion of public transport ridership enable the low-income family rely on this mode of transport, which is a very affordable alternatives for them instead of riding private cars, which can help them to reduce their expenditure significantly, up to 6 to 10%. What else is good for having a TOD in place and doing your urban planning? It encourages active, safe, and healthy communities. Why so? Well, encourage vibrant, livable public places, supporting more people-oriented activities such as cafe and shops. So it's easy. And also it's such a walkable distance. People don't need to ride a car and go to places and that they enjoy themselves to work by walking. So it actually helps reduce chronic diseases and encourage a more healthier lifestyle, which is important benefit in the long-term run. And such adoption is done by cities like Melbourne, which introduce a range of daytime and nighttime activities to the historical linkway to bring people into 6 neglected places and improve safety of the city center. So, all in all, TOD brings health benefit, time benefit, and community benefit. So it's a focal point we generalize and organize stagnant urban district and sometimes unlock development potentials. So TOD is intrinsic to sustainable and livable city. So what's that do with Hong Kong? In fact, a lot of people would have to admit Hong Kong have a very good public transport system compared to a lot of cities in the world. But Hong Kong have their own challenges. One of them, obviously, is about air pollution. The street level pollution at a concentrated area like Causeway Bay, Central and Mong Kok, according to the data we gained from the EPD's report, non-compliance of both 1 hour AQO and annual AQO for NO2 had exceedance. Also, there's an index called Hackney Environmental Index, which shows air pollutions in terms of countable, quantifiable terms. In that report, it shows air pollution in Hong Kong result in about 2,000 mature deaths, 3.5 million doctors visits, so people will queue up and waste more time to go to see doctors, and economic loss of about $27.4 billion. And there are plenty of causes of traffic congestions, and it can be ranging from limited scope of road transport infrastructure, massive number of vehicles, competing use of road spaces, and management and enforcement issues, or even roadworks. But the major contributors is private cars. And in Hong Kong, about 70% of total private cars will take up about 40 to 70% of total traffic flow in major roads in Hong Kong. And that shows a figure on about average car journey speed in Hong Kong Island, which is 20 kilometers per hour, pretty slow, and more congested area like Connaught Road and Queen's Road, which is 10 km per hour. So it is a frustration to citizens in general, including you and I. Well, the C40 have set out a good practice guidance for transit-oriented development, which is around 8 areas. I must say some of the areas in Hong Kong actually are doing quite good compared to other cities, but I would like to go through one by one and tell you some other good sort of examples around the world. First of all, walk. Now, walk provides a very affordable way and is a very healthy way and low-carbon way of transportation, but it needs connectivities, obviously. And for transportation, it has something. Commuting is about going to one place to another. So it's important to have a very strong connectivity between public places and between places to go that is walkable. In Hong Kong context, we do have full-time pedestrian street, part-time pedestrian street, traffic climbing street in some of the populated places. But can be more can be done. One very good example in New York City, in Broadway Boulevard. Presumably if you go to New York, you will go there and do shopping. Before 2009, it was no strength emphasis on pedestrian zone. It was unpresent. But since they have more proactively to work on the pedestrianizations of zoning, traffic injuries have reduced, pedestrian injury have reduced, pedestrian volume and their staying time increase. So it helps the business around the area and is benefit for all. Cycling. Cycling obviously is a big key exercise in Hong Kong now. I say probably very close to running. It's a very good way for transportation because it's a zero carbon transport, literally. It's convenient, it's very efficient, and it's quite easy for people to go to a little bit further places, like for example, go to work. You're probably not able to walk even from where you live or where you come out from the transit station. But in Hong Kong context, our cycling track is a bit more concentrated on new territories. And obviously, there are a bit of disconnection around those. But obviously, I know that the government is building one from Tuen Mun to Shangshui Station, which helps. I think if we're talking about cycling, Copenhagen is the one city you won't sort of forget or will omit. It's back in the 70s, quite a long time ago, Copenhagen had been invested in their cycling infrastructures. And they have an ambitious target as by 2025 to have 50% of commuter trip that used by bicycle, and that's really high. Nowadays, 45% of the total people working or studying are using bicycle, and 50% of cyclists claim they use cycling to transport to their work and around the city, not because it's cheap, but it's just because it's convenient. Connect. I don't need to explain too much. Basically, it's about roads connecting to places you want, from where you come out from the transit station, albeit it's a train or bus or boat or light rail. It creates a dense network of streets and parks and sort of encourage cycling and walking, which should be relatively straightforward. This can be found in the very neighbor cities. In Singapore, Singapore had encouraged provision of through-block pedestrian links, improved permeability between street blocks, so you can switch through from one phase to another instead of go around a big block. Places like Jakarta, you might need to take a taxi to go from one side of the road to another side of the road. So in that sense, it helps the downtown to be planned into a pedestrian-friendly area. And similar to Hong Kong, Singapore is a hot weather country. And they also thought of that and add awnings to the walkers so that they can shield pedestrians from extreme weather. Now, transit, I will go through very quickly because we have a very high efficiency and more railway-relied transit system. And some of them will argue that railway transit system is very energy intensive and the nodule, like the exit of the station, is a little bit too far apart. So it's a little bit difficult to have the TOD effect. And some of the places like Brazil, they have a slightly different approach. They use above ground approach. They use something called BRT. It's bus rapid transit. So basically, they put small buses along very busy ribbon of development that got all the mixture of use to go. So people can jump on and off those buses. Very convenient to do all the works of life and activities, and makes all the trip back and forth very transport efficient, because people get in and out, front and back to those areas. So it's a ribbon of development which helps. One of the example is in Stockholm, which I think some of the speakers have talked some about Stockholm on various issues. In this case, it's about transit-oriented concentrated development, whereby they turn a rundown industrial area into residence for about 20,000 residents, providing jobs for over 5,000 people. So theoretically, 1/4 of the people don't need to go away from their district to go to work, which is good. It helps local community, local development. And because of the good transportation provision, with 50% of residents are taking public transport, and compared to the rest of the districts around the Stockholm area, it's actually 50% lower than other districts, which means they are much more energy efficient and carbon conscious compared to other developments. Now mix. Hong Kong is also very good at that. As a vibrant and dynamic community, Hong Kong is very good at that. Unlike a lot of cities whereby the building height is usually not that high, Hong Kong is high, complex, mixed building. The same building can be clinic, office, house of residence, shops, and even downstairs it could be MTR stations. So it is a very, very well mixed area that people can do shorter daily trip to go to their job or home. So some of you might not need to carry umbrellas if you go out to work, because it's just so easy. One of the examples also is in Olympic Village in Vancouver. In 2010, they create mixed community use at the Winter Olympic Village, which housed about 13,000 people. And they think about important elements of TOD, which is what I said about shops, retails, place to work, and things like that. And one of the very key things is about open spaces. One of the key things about TOD is to have nice civic places for people to go in and out, meet and chat, and sort of connecting the daytime activity to nighttime activity, which they may have entertainment. For that, they become Canada's first net zero community, generate as much as energy as you. Obviously, they include a lot of green features. I presume is part of that bit of the Olympic. Densify, I wouldn't spend too much time on that because Hong Kong is a very dense city. So I would jump on the areas that compact is the same. So I want to put on the last one, shift. What is shift? It's something that I think we should concentrate on. Is to shift away from private vehicle use. If following on the previous 7 examples, is to encourage or discourage motorists to use their private transport and go to public transport using more environmentally sound manner. One of the examples is in London, whereby they install tools called public transport accessibility level scoring, which is a system which have a tool that assesses the level of walking distance to transport stops and stations, including measuring the level of transport service and the rider connectivity. The score is being used to develop set of parking and density standards, so they don't need to overplan the provisions of car parks, or they can give permits to developers on how their public spaces and parking spaces should be planned right. So on that note, I conclude my presentation. So thank you.